I want to bring my man in. We are joined with the man himself, Kit Klarenberg. Kit Klarenberg is investigative journalist documenting the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. You can find his work on Global Delinquents or Gray Zone UK. If I'm not mistaken, though, your last work was on just Gray Zone, correct?
Indeed, yeah. I mean, Gray Zone UK is like a dedicated section of the site. So, I mean, it's maybe giving me too much plaudits to suggest that this is a independent standalone operation. But, yeah.
It's right, wait. It says right here, just for the audience, it just says the Gray Zone. Indeed. Good job, man. Good job.
Yeah. Here we are.
Not just Gray Zone UK.
Yeah, anyway. Sure. So no, I mean, it was interesting what you were just talking as I joined about proxies. We see a very interesting, call it a divergence or contrast for the less pretentious. 30 years ago, in my neck of the woods, which is to say the former Yugoslavia, the US was backing neo-Nazi venerating ultra-nationalist lunatics in order to try and break up a much bigger country. Does this sound familiar?
A little bit.
Like that at all? So yeah, no, thank you so much for featuring this. But yeah, so August 4th, it marked the 30th anniversary of Operation Storm, which is it's not particularly well known in the West today. For a variety of reasons, but this was a absolutely extraordinary and explicitly genocidal blitzkrieg, which was carried out by US trained, funded, and armed ultra-nationalist Croatian proxies to expel Croatia's entire Serbian population. And it led to up to 350,000 people having to flee the area, many on foot, I might add, never to return. And the elderly and the disabled and the infirm were executed summarily. It has left deep and cohering scars across the region, which are felt to this day. It also, I think, has informed Western proxy strategy ever since. And it, funnily enough, in the wake of Ukraine's unexpectedly successful late 2022 counteroffensive, a wide variety of sources sought to make parallels with Operation Storm and Ukraine's actions. So it's clearly viewed as a success, even if its results were absolutely horrific. And there are reports from US diplomats who visited the regions of Croatia, primarily Krajina, which is historic Serb territory that was assigned to Croatia administratively following World War II, but had never been part of Croatia before that. They record walking through, towns and cities that had once been kind of bustling with significant populations, just literal crickets is all they could hear. We're talking like the entire wipeout of a population as a result of this. The documents that we reported on at the Grey Zone, they have been in the public domain for a number of years. Nobody's gone near them. I think the reasons for that are quite clear, because on the one hand, they show that the US, while publicly supporting a negotiated settlement to the war in Croatia, was secretly encouraging their Croat proxies to wage, yes, a brutal war of extermination and total population removal. But more generally as well, they amply underline how what's the word, entwined the US was with all of this. And to use the modern comparison. Like, we are headed this Friday, allegedly, for peace talks between Putin and Trump directly in Alaska. Funnily enough, Sarah Palin's invocation of Alaska's proximity to Russia, meaning that she's well placed to be a foreign policy advisor, seems to have paid off, shockingly, nearly 20 years later. But the real point is that we have heard a lot about the necessity of peace talks in Ukraine and a negotiated settlement. It's not going to happen because the Western powers, who are on the one hand calling for this, are also calling for total Ukrainian victory and zero concessions, which is going to not result in anything. And I, again, for the Grey Zone, but also my personal website, Global Delinquents. It wouldn't be a show with you without a shameless plug, Jamal, for my own work. We see this over and over and over again, where, in the various conflicts in the former Yugoslavia, the US's formal position was always, we support negotiated settlement.
Right.
We are striving for peace in the most difficult of circumstances. But Washington was encouraging its proxies and its clients and its assets to not negotiate at all. So, despite the fact that their proxies were outgunned, outmanned, often outmaneuvered, they refused to negotiate because they believed they had endless US financial and military support. So they did not approach negotiations in good faith. They were purely for PR purposes. Except the key difference now is, in August 1995, the Croats had all of the Western weapons and training and a relatively weak enemy force that they could run roughshod over. In Ukraine, they've run out of weapons. The EU is really struggling to rustle up any funds, public or private, to keep this going. And I think that, in a sense, what we're seeing now, it represents the death of a kind of monstrous blueprint that was forged in Croatia and Bosnia and Kosovo and other parts of the former Yugoslavia 30 years ago. This model is now dead.
They still use it. And it's not just Croatia. Kill squads, South America. Is there really a difference?
Yeah.
It's like, I need a thick neck guy with no conscience that's willing to kill people. Here's a gun, here's money, here's training. Go out and do our political objectives. And those political objectives dovetail in monstrous ways. And so the character of it may look different, but it's still the same thing. Like, even in, if you're thinking of terrorists, right? If you're talking about Syria, and it's like, okay, we need people to overthrow that government. Hey, I have no conscience. I have a thick neck, I have a beard. Give me a weapon. Okay, here's a weapon. Go do it. And they will go and do it. And so, regardless of whether it's you using religious fascists, whether you're using ethnic, just neo-Nazis, the blueprint is the same. I agree with you. It's the same blueprint used all over the world. And yeah, the biggest difference here is Russia. Every syllable that comes out of my mouth is a person Russia sends to hell or heaven. They are losing, and they're losing badly. But that's the wild part. Right, like Trump is like, this is going to be humiliating when all of this collapses, and it's about to collapse. And Europe is like, screw you, man, let's keep this going. It's like, dude, it's about to collapse. Like Trump, look, if Trump believed that he was winning, he will not be negotiating right now. He is negotiating because he knows that this is, that somebody is calling his bet. Europe. And I'll ask that question to you. Why are they so delusional?
Yeah, it's very difficult to unpick because I think there has been this sense for a very long time, like within European corridors of power, if you can even call it that, which is that, the US will always come to the rescue. There will always, whatever the rhetoric, whoever's in power when it comes down to it, the US will ultimately pull our chestnuts out of the fire. And that's very much been Britain's thinking for a century going on now. Is that like, there's that Winston Churchill quote, which is the Americans can be relied upon to do the right thing after all other options have been exhausted. But this doesn't take into account the fact that the US, it doesn't have the weapons to supply Ukraine anymore. They're not in a position as they were in 2022 and 2023 to like build Ukraine an entire new army anymore. I have reported for my own website and also for Press TV. There was a report from GINSA, which is this very powerful Zionist lobby organization, which is a driving force behind the training of US police forces by the Israeli occupation forces.
Right.
It one way or another probably led to the death of George Floyd, amongst other people. They published a report not long ago which stated that the US spent about 20% of its missile interceptor stockpile during the 12-day war. Right. And it's going to take 8 years to replace what was spent in 12 days. Like, and I think that, that there is this wider delusion within European power centers. Again, I don't think that that's even an accurate term because they have no power. There's always this sense that, oh, well, at the end of the day, the Americans will come to the rescue. These people are still living in this unipolar mindset. We have Kaja Kallas, the insane Baltic hawk who's running EU defense and foreign policy, who says, well, if we can't defeat Russia, how are we going to defeat China? Why are you thinking in these terms in the first place? Let alone, like, why would you ever think about taking on China? This country that hasn't like fired a shot since like the 70s, which is like,
from her, by the way.
Go ahead, please go ahead. Go ahead.
This is Kalis. Giving her commentary.
Este perrito se parece a la tía. Yo soy Porfirio el perrito negro.
Agárrala otra vez, agárrala.
Yeah, that's Kalis. She's given.
It's funny because it's true. I think, and it just, but this is the thing, is that like genuinely, like the EU is led now by these like insane hawks. Britain is run by these completely insane hawks, and like, I mean, I think as you and I have discussed before, Jamal, that like the British still want to pretend that they're this major global power. They are at the forefront of pushing Ukraine to all of these major escalatory actions, these insane suicide missions like Krinky and Kursk. Like, this was all like British planned, and it's just like, at what stage do you take the L? Like, well, really, yeah.
No, please finish. I'm sorry. Please.
Yeah. No, it's okay. No, I mean, I just think that to circle this round to what we were discussing, initially, is the breakup of Yugoslavia was. It was a classic example of what I think the British and maybe the major European powers like France and Germany always try and replicate, which is, well, we're going to do that. We're going to be like the brains, right? Like, we're going to do the psychological warfare work. We're going to we're going to do the propaganda, and America's going to provide the muscle and the missiles and the weapons. But again, this is 30 years ago. Like, a lot has changed since then. And I mean, this is somewhat tangential, but I think it sums up the kind of state that we're in right now, where I think it was a few weeks back, like the US Army's official Twitter account or X account, whatever, it published a video of a drone dropping a grenade. And the accompanying commentary was, have you ever seen a drone drop a grenade before? And it's like, yeah, like every day for 3.5 years in Donbass, and you're only trying this now. Like, and it's like, yeah, that, like, I just the total lack of learning from what's going on in eastern Ukraine now, where tanks are irrelevant, artillery is an important factor, but not the most important factor. Drones are dominating the battlefield. Russia has an edge there, which it didn't have at the start of this. And it's like, yeah, that they are stuck in this time warp where they're still, by token of being, U.S. vassals. Oh well, we're still, even if we're deputies, masters of the world. But it's not like that anymore. You have the rise of so many different military powers, not just Russia and China, but North Korea, Iran, Ansarallah have been using like hypersonic and ballistic missiles, which the West doesn't have. There has been a total failure to adapt to this new operating environment internationally. They want to cover their ears and just go blah 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 blah, and just ignore the reality staring them in the face. And I think that, if you want to, again, to bring things full circle, if you want to look at the kind of pinnacle of the Western Empire, the US-led Western Empire, global empire, and kind of roughly the point where everything started to unravel, it was in Croatia in 1995. This was an absolutely brutal incursion, which was cheered by the quote-unquote international community. Russia at the time was led by drunken Western puppet Boris Yeltsin. China was poor and also trying to seek a pro-Western path. So they just kind of either cheered this on or turned a blind eye. There was nothing that they could really do about it. We're not there anymore. To a large extent, and I might add as well that again, potentially tangentially, the mighty independent journalist Mark Ames, he wrote in late 2008, he wrote a fantastic essay, one of my favorite bits of journalism of all time, for his then website, The Exile. Where he visited the sites of the fighting in Georgia following the very brief Georgia-Russia war, and he found that all of these burnt out American weapons. There were Russian troops feeding themselves heartily on American-provided rations for Georgian forces. And he said, and bear in mind, this is a country which was colonized by the US quite heavily following the 2003 Rose Revolution, which was instigated by the National Endowment for Democracy and the CIA. And he states in this, well, I can see that this is the day that America's empire has died, right? We've expanded to such an extent that we can't maintain this any longer. And I think that ever since then, America has kind of been in the position of Britain in the 1930s, where on paper they are the world's predominant economic and military power. How that translates to actual war fighting capability, actual force exertion, the ability to make countries do what they want them to do, it's actually rather limited, and it's getting even more limited all the time.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I agree with that. There's a limit when you have countries that have nuclear weapons, right? The moment that you have, the moment that you're not the sole superpower on the planet, the moment that, for one thing, I thought there were several canary in the coal mines. Afghanistan, where the Taliban takes back the territory, that's canary in the coal mine. The trade war with China, where you don't have the capability of exerting your will against another country that, 6 years ago you were able to pull off. Okay, that's canary in the coal mine. Getting crushed in Ukraine is a massive canary in a coal mine. It is humiliating. And yet that humiliation gets worse and worse every day, where war of attrition finally shows the 3 years of wear and tear on the Ukrainian military, where they're dragging in the elderly out of convalescent homes and kids who are, like 18 years old into a military campaign, or press ganging dancers and people mowing their lawn. I mean, the guy was riding his bicycle, the Ukrainian Jeep pulls up, the guy runs off his bike trying to get away from the press gang. I mean, this stuff is outrageous, right? That is not a recipe for success. And when you are the US...
Well, I mean, I think sorry to interrupt my friend, but I think what probably like one of the most representative videos that I've seen of the conscription splurge in Ukraine is there was like a Deliveroo cyclist, or or whatever it's, like kind of Uber Eats style cyclist, where he's cycling along in Kiev with his like big delivery backpack like on, right, and he gets like tackled. Yeah, he gets tackled off his bike and with his backpack and all, and thrown into a van. And it's like, you couldn't get a more perfect visual manifestation of of Western economic colonization, of the total failure of the proxy war, is that they're now having to haul in people who are, whether willingly or not, working for US corporations for subsistence wages. To die on the front line for BlackRock profits. And it's like, this is it's not really spoken about enough. And I might add as well that this is something I'm working on now. On August 7th, like Gallup, which is a highly respected US polling firm, they published this insane data which showed that about 70% of Ukrainians favor an end to They favor a negotiated end to the war as soon as possible. Only 24% wish to keep fighting. I do wonder who this 24% are. Maybe they just spoke to like Zelensky and his coterie of cokeheads or something. Yeah. But it's like, you know what I mean? It's like and there was an enormous amount of bitterness towards the US in this poll as well. And it's just like, the only response to calls to end this absolute nightmare shit show emanating from European capitals and mainstream pundits and quote unquote journalists and think tank apparatchiks is just keep going.
Yeah,
because it's been such a success for everyone involved so far.
I think from Europe's point of view, though, they're not Europeans. Like, I mean, I think that's the way they look at it. It's like, yeah, you're Europeans, but you're not us. Like, if I press a button and I have no consequences for what happens when I press that button, okay, do I really care about the consequences? Like, that's more of a moral thing. Okay, but running governments is not a moral issue per se. What they know is we're sending Ukrainians to go and die. If we screw up, then it's not Brits that are dying, it's Ukrainians that are dying. And there is a level of delusion, though, in how long Ukraine can keep this up that they don't seem to acknowledge, which maybe it's one of those things of, well, we want them to fight for as long as it takes and fight to the last dead Ukrainian, and we're okay with that. But there are consequences for Europe in this. And one last thing on the Croatia thing. I was in Croatia. I went to visit, I think this was several years ago. I went to this presentation where they were talking about, I think, Yugoslavia or something like that. It was fascinating because depending upon where you are, you get a different point of view of Yugoslavia and the war and Croatia's role in the war. And the guy was telling me how, they've gotten to the point where, let's say like a woman will go to the bank and the guy at the checkout counter was one of the soldiers that raped her and killed her husband. It would be weird situations like that because of the wars that were taking place. What do they say about it? Like what do they say about it in Serbia? Do you know what they say about it in Croatia now, these days? How do they talk about it?
Well, I mean, no, I mean, it's a completely crazy situation because, like, the wars in this is what's really interesting as well, and it's something that my friends in Serbia, they are very keen. So, for instance, like whenever like France and England play like a soccer match, they're very quick to mock it as saying like, these ancient blood feuds, between these two nations. And it's just like the fact of the matter is that like actually before the Western fomented wars in the former Yugoslavia, ethnic tension didn't exist. Like, is a lie. Like, so I have been told many very heartbreaking stories actually of by people I know in the region who, so for instance, a Bosnian Croat I know who he was about 16 at the time, where one day he got a knock on the door. And it was like all of the dads in the local neighborhood were going out to have one final drink together because as of like 7 a.m. the next day they were enemy combatants, right?
But what did they use for that? Like in Ukraine, they effectively use this kind of Western Nazism that they had stoked into the society and used NATO membership as the crux for that. What did they use there if there were no frustrations prior?
Yeah, well, I think the key. I mean, the key thing was that, like, in the wake of World War II, which was like a battle for survival for Yugoslavia, like particularly Serbs, that like all of the Nazi-created puppet structures, like the Ustasha in Croatia, or the Kosovo Albanian puppet government, they all went into hiding. Usually in Western countries, right? They hid out in the Five Eyes spying network. Latin America, of course, like another key exodus point for these people. But then, like when you have independence roll around in the early 90s, suddenly all of these people come back, and in many cases they've been working for the CIA the whole time. While they've been part of the quote unquote diaspora. So I mean, and I also think as well that there was, I mean, this is maybe another episode in and of itself, but there was also a strong like economic aspect to this. So in late 1990, the US passed the Foreign Appropriations Act, which explicitly stated that all financial aid to Yugoslavia and trading with Yugoslavia will end unless its constituent republics hold independence referendums in the next 6 months under State Department observation. Now, at this point, Britain, Germany, and the US had been supporting separatist nationalist movements within Yugoslavia for decades, and like training them to carry out terror attacks, etc. So, like when this legislation is passed, therefore effectively cutting off Yugoslavia, from international financial markets, you have all of these nationalist movements like waiting in the wings. And again, to bring this back to like Ukraine, for example, in 1957, the CIA produced this extensive 200-page document on, I think it was called resistance factors, and it's all about the potential of staging an invasion of Ukraine in order to break up the Soviet Union. And it divides Ukraine into 12 separate different regions based on the local population's receptibility to Western invasion. And like Crimea and Donbass are ranked 1, which is to say they will completely reject any Western involvement. And then you go to like Lviv and Galicia, like these areas that are like formerly Polish, and with a strong history of Nazi collaboration, and they were judged as like the key areas for supporting an Anglo-American intervention in Ukraine, concerned with like breaking up the Soviet Union. So like, and then you fast forward to Maidan, and like the same areas the CIA tapped as like likely to support US intervention are the areas that support Maidan most strongly, and the areas that were deemed to be not conducive to Western invasion rejected Maidan. Right, so yeah, it is a recurring theme of like sponsoring or even just creating nationalism out of nothing. You got to bear in mind that, like, you know, at the peak of Ukraine war hysteria in 2022, when there does seem unbelievably to have been a very legitimate belief on the part of Western policymakers that this could be the end of Russia. Congress convened a special hearing on the necessity of sponsoring nationalist breakaway movements in Russia. You know, they wanted to do to Yugoslavia, they wanted to do to Russia what they did to Yugoslavia. And I'll never forget, like, you know, we're going back about 10 years ago now. I was having a chat with a very close Serb friend of mine who warned me then, before all of this stuff kicked off, they're trying to do to Russia what they did to us. You know, sanctions, international isolation, demonization. You know, this is what destroyed Yugoslavia and demonized the Serbs to this day.
They failed.
Yeah.
And honest to God, man, we need to fail in this. Like, this is fucking outrageous. Like, no, I'm being serious. If you think of, think of all the chaos. Think of all the people that died. And, you know, even if you're just talking about Russia and Ukraine, you're talking about like 120,000 Russians, maybe 1 million Ukrainians. And it's like, okay, well, why did they die? Oh, right, because the U.S. decided it wanted to overthrow the government because we wanted to get after Russia in a geopolitical game of expansion. And it just so happens that it puts me in the mind of Israel, right, where Israel's like, hey, we're hopped up off of killing babies. I bet we can take Iran. And it's like, hey, just to let you know, that's a man. That's not a child. You've been taking out resistance groups. You haven't dealt with a proper country of 80 million people or 90 million people. They're like, yeah, we can do it. Look at all these babies that we killed. And you lose. You get taken apart in a way that is uncommon, in a way that you think. It's like, holy shit, we did not expect this much damage. Well, that's the same thing with Russia, right? We can break Russia up into multiple districts. Kalis, that lunatic, came out and said something like that. And you lose. And it's one of those things where you need to lose, because that pattern of let's use narcos in South America to take down governments that we don't like. How many people are you killing? How many lives are you destroying? Not because they're doing anything wrong. It's because you want global primacy. That shit needs to stop. And the only way that stops is if you fail. And frankly, your empire collapses. So I'm brutal about the stuff because I'm sick of seeing this nonsense being put into action over and over and over again, almost as this pattern. It just, in this case, it didn't work. In Serbia's case, unfortunately, it did. Kit?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a wider point to make here as well, which is like you got to bear in mind that, like, I actually, and I'm not trying to like stand for Trump or any member of his government here, but like you got to bear in mind that, like, the US can step back from this very easily, right? And I think I do think that there are, for the most part, they want out of this because they understand it's a quagmire. Right, like, you know, it's like US troops retreating from Lebanon at Reagan's direction because he was like, okay, we're fucked. This is terrible. Like, let's get out of it. Let's get out of it.
Right.
Like, you know, and I do think that is a very predominant feeling within US politics. Is like, well, you know, why are we so heavily invested in this country that's like thousands of miles away, that like has absolutely no bearing on our security or our economic, and in fact is actually, like, you know, damaging our economic prosperity, keeping this going on, you know. But from, say, like Britain's perspective, the Anglo-American empire is on the line in Donbass. Like, it was as we've discussed before, Jamal, it's the British who have been pushing for this very aggressively, on top of elements of the US power structure like Victoria Nuland and John McCain for a very long time. Like, they saw this as an attempt. They saw the Maidan coup as an attempt to break up Russia and to use Ukraine as a beachhead for doing this. It's a through line throughout my work. British officials saw this as a grand opportunity to start World War III and finish off Russia forever and prevent Russia from getting in its way in terms of expansion in Central and Eastern Europe and Asia and beyond. And it hasn't worked out. And so that's why they're desperately hanging on to this and willing to encourage Zelensky's intransigence, because they know very well the US could withdraw from this tomorrow and they would be completely screwed.
Kind of agree. I mean, I agree with you that if Trump pulls out, Europe can't carry the ball, but America has a thing for global primacy. And even in this notion of pulling out, it's not that the U.S. wants to pull out. The U.S. wants to freeze it where they can come back to it later. Maybe Putin dies in 10 years. Maybe you have a weaker leader in 10 years. Look at what they did to Syria. They froze the line in Syria. There was the belief that the conflict was over with, and at the most inopportune time, it springs back to life with a bunch of jihadis and animals running through, murdering people, and eventually ethnically cleansing with the fall of Assad. They would prefer something like that with Russia of, hey, let's just freeze it. Let's just, we're going to build up Ukraine. We're going to give them new weapons. We're going to give them new money. We're going to give them all of this stuff. And of course, the Russians at this point says, well, no, that's not happening. We will keep going if that is your policy. Meaning, if that's what you're going to do, we'll just keep going. They want to freeze it. They don't want to end it. Meaning from the American point of view, I get what you're saying about the Brits. I'm saying that America has this notion of world primacy. Losing sucks and it's humiliating. What they would prefer is, let's save face. Let's just keep the lines where they are, and we'll come back to this later. I could be wrong. Do you disagree with that, by the way?
Well, I mean, I don't at all. And I think that, I think this is basically what happened in Syria, where it's like, initially there was this US exuberance for getting rid of Assad. And when they realized it was like more difficult, like they kind of, well, we've got the Caesar sanctions, we've got a third of their country, their resource-rich regions under occupation. Yes. Like, what do we care who's in power in Damascus? It was the British chiseling away at Assad's rule in the background from maybe like 2016 to 2023, via the white helmets and all these other intelligence cutouts. Like, they really wanted Assad gone. From the US's perspective, they couldn't care. Like, so yeah, I think that again, a similar
just
dynamic.
Trump kept the oil. Trump protected terrorists in Idlib, al-Jilani. Meaning it was the US's policy to be their air force in those regions in order to suck resources away from the Syrian government. The US had CIA going all the way back to George Bush Senior, if I'm not mistaken, with Obama spending billions in order to try to overthrow the Assad government using effectively terrorists as a battering ram to do it. We were directly involved in trying to get rid of Assad because from our point of view, we wanted to go after Iran, and we needed to get rid of Syria, or at the very least, flip Syria in order to be a platform to do so. I'm not undercutting the notion of the Brits. I'm just saying, what is it? Operation September Sycamore, you get the CIA working it. Meaning, we had a direct interest, even going to the point of protecting Jilani for it. The Brits shaved his beard, put him in a suit, washed him down, and say, "Hey, we're going to make this guy presentable."
Yeah.
Like, so
they whacked him. They whacked him in the delousing tank,
right?
And now they have. now they have an MI6 has an office in Syria's presidential palace. But is that I think that actually sums up perfectly the kind of conflicting approaches that the British and the Americans have. Is that that through brute force, via their control of the international financial system and via their superior force generation power, like, they occupied Syria, as Trump said, we're there for the oil, we've got the oil. Like, why would you care? Why would you care who was putatively in power in Syria, in this, in Damascus, in this like unrebuildable, ravaged country? Like, you wouldn't, would you? But I think the British in the background and in the meantime were like trying to find a replacement because they'd invested so much in trying to get rid of Assad. And I think it's the same in Ukraine. It's just like it's sunk cost fallacy. Like, European powers, particularly Britain, they have basically disarmed themselves trying to equip Ukraine to defeat Russia, and all of this equipment's been destroyed. Even relative normies, this is what I find really interesting, is like, of course, you have the insane braying mob of Ukrainian ultras, although they're ever dwindling, like, saying like, oh well, Kiev can still win if I don't know, Ukraine gets given nukes or something. But there are like, but there are like kind of normie elements who work for like Western defense think tanks, etc., who are like openly admitting, well, this is just over now. We've run out of weapons. We can't create anything like the ammunition, vehicles, munitions, etc., armor, whatever that's been sent on any scale or at any pace. We just have to accept we've lost now. But for ideological purposes, they can't.
Yeah, they don't want to do it. Kit, man, thank you for this. Always appreciate.
Always a pleasure.
I really do. And
always a pleasure,
again,
never a burden, Jamal.
You do fantastic work. That's why I always bring you on to talk about your articles, because your articles are always really good. Global Delinquents, the Gray Zone UK, the Gray Zone itself. So it's like great job on that. Kit Klarenberg is an investigative journalist documenting his role in intelligence services and shaping politics and perspectives. Kit, you have a fantastic day, man. Be safe, okay?
God bless you, Jamal. You too, mate. Take care.
Thanks, man. All right. Kit Klarenberg. Definitely check out his articles. Like I said, Gray Zone UK, Global Delinquents, Gray Zone in general. He has the one up about Serbia. So definitely check him out. We have come to the